Remember David Johnson, the once proclaimed greatest running back in the NFL turned forgotten veteran, falling desperately short of the mark once set for him with the Arizona Cardinals? What happened to him, and how did his potential fade so fast? This is his story, now retired after several years of trying to find it again, having had one of the greatest individual seasons of any running back in football history. Johnson was drafted 86th overall by the Arizona Cardinals. With a sudden emergence in his second season, earning first-team All-Pro honors, Johnson was on track to being one of the best running backs in the NFL. He emerged almost out of nowhere, but a nasty injury just as he was reaching his peak would be the start of one of the most disappointing falls for what was once such a promising young star. After being signed by the New Orleans Saints in 2022, Johnson appeared in only 5 games. With a short-lived career that started with unbelievable statistics and ended with bitter disappointment, David Johnson's name fell quietly into the void. Johnson was drafted in the 3rd round of the 2015 NFL Draft, 86th overall by the Arizona Cardinals. His $2.9 million contract spanned over 4 years. During his first season in 2015, the Cardinals running back was initially assigned to the 4th string, but entered the season with a ton of hype out of training camp. Johnson was expected to play, and play well. He appeared in his first career game on September 13th, successfully completing a reception for a memorable 55-yard touchdown. As injuries piled up in the Cardinals' backfield, Johnson found himself with a perfect opportunity to gain more playing time. He started to emerge as a versatile running back, providing a valuable depth option for the Cardinals. David Johnson's first career start was December 6, 2015, when he accumulated 99 rushing yards, 2 receptions, and a touchdown, helping the Cardinals rise above the St. Louis Rams. Soon after, in his 3rd career start against the Philadelphia Eagles, he posted a stunning 29 carries for 187 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns, marking a season high and a key talking point around the franchise. Johnson was starting to emerge as a key player in the offense, who could live up to the high hopes that the Cardinals had for him as a real difference maker. With Johnson's help, the Cardinals made the playoffs and a first-round bye. In their first matchup, they dominated the Green Bay Packers to head into the NFC Championship game against Cam Newton and the Carolina Panthers. In what was a pretty lopsided affair, falling short of a Super Bowl appearance, the rookie David Johnson was a bright spark. He scored his first playoff career touchdown and the first points of the game for his team, but the Cardinals were headed home off the back of a 49-15 defeat at the hands of Superman Cam. Overall, Johnson had a pretty impressive rookie season. He had 125 carries, totaling 581 yards and 8 touchdowns. He caught 36 passes for 456 yards and 4 touchdowns. Even as a rookie, Johnson worked his way up the depth chart, making impactful contributions as he filled in for players who fell to injuries. It looks promising for the franchise, but nobody saw the following season's heroics coming. Talk about a breakout season. 2016 David Johnson is the very pinnacle of the term. Not only did he claim the #1 role, but established himself as one of the league's premier running backs. This season was packed with ridiculous stats and memorable plays by one of the league's emerging stars. He played 15 consecutive games with at least 100 yards from scrimmage, a stat that matched Barry Sanders for the longest single-season streak in NFL history. Not only was he making comparisons to legends like Sanders, but he also became one of the 4 running backs in the past 10 seasons who had over 800 receiving yards in a single season. For a running back, that's a pretty rare trait. With 879 receiving yards, his name joined a list of talents including Le'Veon Bell, Matt Forte, and Steven Jackson. Johnson was an incredible dual threat, being able to successfully run between the tackles while also making waves with his receiving talents. Johnson was proving to be a serious weapon and the ultimate flex for a team like the Cardinals. Johnson led the NFL in targets, receptions, receiving yards, and missed tackles forced in the passing game among running backs. He also led the NFL in all-purpose yards with 2,118. Johnson was the lone player in the league in the 2016 season to have over 2,000. He was, by definition, in a league of his own. Johnson was the consensus #1 pick for fantasy football owners during that 2016 season. In the same way Christian McCaffrey has been valued as the greatest asset in the fantasy world, there was once a time where that title belonged to none other than David Johnson. The hype he had going into 2017 was unparalleled. These stats are pretty impressive on paper, but they're even more incredible when you realize how far away they were from his competition. Johnson successfully branded himself as a player that could reach new heights with incredible depth to his skill set. It's safe to say that he was indeed on track to be one of the best running backs the league had seen in a long time. Then the injuries began. In the final regular season game, Johnson left in the first quarter due to a knee injury from an awkward collision on a tackle. The injury turned out to only be an MCL sprain with no need for surgery, and he'd make a comeback in time for the 2017 campaign. As the 2017 season began, the surging star hoped to make his comeback after a sad ending to his big season. However, his passion for building on the foundation he laid the year prior was quickly silenced. Johnson got injured again in the 3rd quarter of the season opener against the Detroit Lions. It was revealed that Johnson dislocated his wrist and required surgery with around 2 to 3 months of recovery time, sidelining this breakout star once again. By November, the Cardinals officially announced that Johnson would not be returning for the remainder of the 2017 season, a major loss for the team and another dent in his chance to realize the heights of his potential. In September of 2018, despite his recent injury, Johnson signed a 3-year, $39 million contract with the Cardinals. $30 million of that would be guaranteed money. At this point, the Cardinals were holding on to hope that Johnson would remain the weapon he was in the prior season. It was certainly risky, given the quickly building list of injuries, and Arizona would find out the hard way that maybe they made a mistake. His 2018 campaign was an up-and-down story, with flashes of greatness and struggles intertwined as he failed to completely live up to the high expectations of 2016. The Cardinals were facing their own adversity as a team, with new quarterback Sam Bradford performing poorly. Other teams caught on to Johnson being the main threat and began stacking the box to contain the superstar. Head coach Steve Wilks and offensive coordinator Mike McCoy focused on an old-school approach and utilized him less as a receiver out of the slot. This strategy prohibited Johnson from performing to the best of his ability, and the Cardinals faded away, with what looked like a hopeful contender in his rookie year quickly fading into NFL irrelevance. The Cardinals managed to score just 6 combined points in the first 2 games of the season. Things were looking pretty bleak. However, Johnson did make somewhat of an impact in staying sharp as an offensive threat. He totaled 940 rushing yards and 446 receiving yards with 10 combined touchdowns. His stats weren't that bad with all factors in play, but he was showing signs that perhaps he wasn't the player he'd been before. His 2019 season with the Cardinals was the start of his ultimate downfall, as he failed to regain his all-pro form. Despite having an improved system within the team and a promising quarterback on the rise with Kyler Murray, things were just not shaping up for the running back. He had simply lost the explosiveness he used to have. It was very quickly looking like the form he'd once discovered was long gone. What remained was a very different player to the man who'd once worn those same shoes. The Cardinals acquired Kenyon Drake mid-season, which only furthered the withering of Johnson's role in the team, pushing him to more of a backup role as Drake became a primary ball carrier. This shift resulted in Johnson's declining stats. He missed the final 2 games with an ankle injury, serving as a microcosm of how his career had crumbled over the past few years. Johnson ended the season with 345 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns, with 370 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns in the passing game, more of a role player than a franchise star. As the year drew to a close, the pressing question centered on his future with the franchise. Kenyon Drake seemed to fit the primary role better, and Johnson was almost entirely out of favor in Arizona. His heavy contract would make it really difficult to move him. He was on track to make $10.2 million in base salary, which became fully guaranteed in the prior March. He also had $2.1 million guaranteed for 2021. At least he would get a payout, despite his future being up in the air. But for the Cardinals, that contract was starting to look pretty ugly. On March 16th, 2020, it was all over. One season of wonder with the Cardinals long forgotten, Johnson was thrust into a trade package headed to Houston. The Houston Texans acquired Johnson alongside a 2020 second-round pick and a 2021 fourth-round pick. The Cardinals received a 2020 fourth-round pick and all-pro wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins. Most importantly, and somewhat moronically, the Texans took on every single penny of Johnson's contract. He then went on to actually perform pretty well for his first season with the Texans. In his Texans debut against the Kansas City Chiefs, he scored a touchdown and recorded 109 scrimmage yards. But by November, Johnson was placed on injured reserve with a concussion. He was cleared in December, only to be placed on reserve again with COVID-19. In Week 15, he featured again, recording 27 rushing yards and 106 receiving yards. At this point, the Texans were 4-10, so his efforts largely faded amidst a miserable year for the franchise that had just traded its star receiver. Johnson finished the season with 691 rushing yards and 6 rushing touchdowns. On the receiving side, he marked 33 receptions for 314 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. The Texans failed to make the playoffs, with the former Cardinals running back simply playing a part in a hopeless season. By 2021, David Johnson was a forgotten talent. He appeared in 13 games, totaling 67 carries for 228 rushing yards and no touchdowns. He only accumulated 1 receiving touchdown. The problem was, Houston didn't even have a star running back to take his place. The lead rusher that season was Rex Burkhead, who totaled 427 rushing yards. That's abysmal. During this season, Johnson battled a nagging thigh injury and missed games due to COVID-19. The Texans wanted out, and he entered the offseason as a free agent. The veteran was turned away in New Orleans early in the 2022 season, seeking work and the chance to rediscover what he had left in the tank. Finally, on November 16, 2022, Johnson signed to the Saints practice squad. By November 16th, he was activated to a roster spot as a depth backup for Alvin Kamara following Mark Ingram's knee injury. After being signed, Johnson appeared in only 5 games. With a short-lived career that started with unbelievable statistics and ended with bitter disappointment, David Johnson's name fell quietly into the void. In May of 2024, he retired. He clipped 4,000 rushing yards with 39 touchdowns on the ground while posting another 2,800 receiving yards and 18 touchdowns through the air. Not bad numbers by all accounts, but you can't help but feel that the eventual outcome of his career was so desperately marred by injuries and featuring on bad football teams. David Johnson's journey in the NFL really got started with a remarkable second season, but what had been a rapid start to his career shortly ended on an overwhelmingly low note. From being established as having the potential to be one of the greatest running backs in the NFL, to ending his career with only 24 rushing yards in his final season, David Johnson's legacy fell shockingly short of the mark he set for himself in that dominant year in 2016. It can be assumed that his wrist injury played a pivotal role in preventing him from regaining his original form. Many fans have also speculated that during this time, Johnson had gotten married and had a child, perhaps shifting focus away from the game he once valued so highly. Maybe he just had pretty rough luck in what would have been his prime years. The story of Johnson's rise and fall is a bitterly disappointing one. Despite experiencing moments of greatness and having a tremendously impressive highlight reel, his career was easily forgotten, washed away with so many who came before him. A flash in the pan, short-lived in excitement, and unable to travel the almost impossible path back to NFL stardom.